Beneath the limestone walls of St. Catherine's Convent in Savannah, Georgia, stands a sealed chapel that hasn't been opened since 1749. Local historians know why. Inside those walls, investigators discovered 23 pages of correspondence that the Catholic Church attempted to destroy. Letters describing something impossible, something that would shatter every religious principle of colonial America. Sister Marie Terzlair, 51 years old, head of the convent's disciplinary committee, known for her rigid enforcement of chastity vows, became pregnant. But this wasn't just any pregnancy. The child's father was a 17-year-old enslaved man named Thomas, owned by the convent itself, and Sister Merritt's didn't hide in shame. She stood before the entire congregation and proclaimed her condition a miracle from God. What happened in those chapel walls didn't just challenge religious doctrine. It exposed a network of secrets that reached from Savannah's wealthiest plantation owners to the archbishop's personal residence. Tonight, after 275 years of silence, we reveal what really happened behind those convent doors. Before we continue with the story of Sister Marie Terzlair and the scandal that consumed St. Catherine's. If dark historical mysteries fascinate you, make sure to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell, because stories this shocking don't appear in any history book. And I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your state or city in the comments. I love knowing where our community of mystery lovers is listening from. Now, let's step back to 1748 Savannah, to a time when religious institutions held absolute power, and discover how one woman's claim would unravel everything. Savannah, in 1748, existed as a peculiar contradiction. Founded only 15 years earlier as a utopian experiment prohibiting slavery and alcohol, the city had already abandoned its founding principles. Rice plantations now stretched along the riverbanks, worked by hundreds of enslaved people whose labor transformed Georgia into one of the most profitable colonies. The city's religious institutions, Baptist, Presbyterian, Anglican, and Catholic, competed for influence among the growing population of 3,000 souls. St. Catherine's Convent occupied 3 acres near the eastern edge of town, its whitewashed buildings visible from the main road. Established in 1742 by French Catholic missionaries, the convent served multiple purposes: spiritual retreat for wealthy women, educational facility for daughters of plantation owners, and administrative center for the church's growing holdings in Georgia. By 1748, the convent housed 18 nuns, 12 novices, 47 students, and maintained ownership of 9 enslaved people who managed the gardens, kitchens, and physical maintenance. Sister Marie Terzlair had arrived from Quebec 7 years earlier, her reputation preceding her. At 44, she'd already served 26 years in religious life. Known throughout New France for her uncompromising enforcement of monastic discipline, her letters of recommendation described a woman of absolute devotion, unmoved by earthly temptation, whose very presence reminds others of their sacred vows. Mother Superior Josephine Beaumont had requested her specifically to reform St. Catherine's, which had earned whispers about its relaxed standards. The transformation was immediate. Sister Marie Terz implemented French monastic rules with military precision. She established inspection schedules, instituted mandatory confession 3 times weekly, and created a discipline committee that investigated any hint of improper conduct. The younger nuns learned to fear her footsteps in the corridors, the way her gray eyes seemed to see through walls. She never raised her voice, didn't need to. Her silence carried more weight than any sermon. Among the convent's enslaved workers, 17-year-old Thomas held a unique position. Purchased 3 years earlier from a Charleston auction, he possessed an unusual education. His previous owner, a merchant who'd fallen into debt, had taught him to read and write, a dangerous skill for an enslaved person illegal in many colonies. The convent used his literacy to manage correspondence, inventory records, and educational materials. Thomas worked primarily in the library, copying texts, organizing documents, and preparing materials for the school. He moved through the convent like a ghost, present but invisible, performing his duties with quiet efficiency. The nuns had grown accustomed to his presence in spaces usually forbidden to men. The chapel during early morning cleaning, the library during afternoon study hours, the hallways when delivering messages. His youth and education made him seem less threatening than the older field workers who never entered the main buildings. Sister Marita had noticed him, of course. She noticed everything, but Thomas represented no concern, just another tool the convent employed for its operations, or so everyone believed. The summer of 1748 brought oppressive heat to coastal Georgia. The convent's thick walls provided some relief, but the humidity made sleep difficult. Night prayers extended later as nuns sought the relative coolness of evening hours. It was during these late services that other sisters began noticing something unusual. Sister Maritz's prayer schedule had changed. For 7 years her routine had been absolutely predictable. Morning prayers at 4:30, private meditation at 6:00, Mass at 7:00, evening prayers at 8:00. But now she appeared at odd hours, 10 at night, 11 sometimes past midnight. When questioned, she explained she was seeking deeper communion with God, that the Holy Spirit had called her to more intensive prayer. Nobody thought to question further. After all, this was Sister Maritz, the woman who embodied religious devotion. The first crack in this facade appeared on the morning of October 3rd, 1748. Sister Agnes Fontaine, a young nun responsible for the convent's linens, entered the laundry room at dawn and discovered something that made her drop her basket. Among the soiled garments lay Sister Marie Terz's nightdress, marked with blood stains in a pattern Sister Agnes immediately recognized. Women in religious communities tracked each other's cycles. They lived too closely not to notice such things. But Sister Maritz hadn't menstruated in 4 years. Everyone knew this. At 51, she'd entered that stage of life where such things ceased. Sister Agnes stood frozen, the nightdress in her trembling hands. She rewashed it 3 times, hung it to dry in the private drying room, and said nothing. But the knowledge burned inside her like hot iron. 3 weeks later, during morning chapel services, Sister Meritor fainted. She'd never shown weakness before, never missed a prayer, never took a day of rest, never complained of any ailment. Mother Superior Josephine ordered her to the infirmary where Sister Catherine Mercier, who served as the convent's medical attendant, examined her. What Sister Catherine discovered defied explanation. She examined Sister Marie Thiers twice, certain she'd made an error, then a 3rd time. Each examination confirmed the impossible. Sister Marie TZ was approximately 3 months pregnant. Sister Catherine stood in the small infirmary, her hands shaking as she recorded her findings in the medical log. She wrote the entry 3 times, crossing out each version, unable to find words that made sense of what she documented. Finally, she wrote simply, "Patient presence with symptoms consistent with early pregnancy." This finding requires immediate consultation with Mother Superior. The meeting took place that same evening in Mother Superior Josephine's private office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of beeswax and old paper. Present were Mother Superior Josephine, Sister Marie TZ, Sister Catherine, and Father Benedict Hammond, the convent's chaplain who'd served in Savannah since its founding. Sister Catherine presented her findings first, her voice barely above a whisper. She detailed the physical symptoms: ceased menstruation, breast changes, morning sickness that Sister Marie TZ had attributed to bad fish at dinner. The examination had been thorough, professional, and left no doubt about the diagnosis. Father Hammond's face flushed red. "This is impossible. Sister Marie TZ has served God for 33 years. There must be another explanation, a tumor perhaps, or some other medical condition that mimics." "I know the difference," Sister Catherine interrupted, a boldness that surprised everyone. "I've attended 17 births in this town. I've examined pregnant women dozens of times. This is not a tumor." Mother Superior Josephine turned to Sister Marie, who sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. "Sister, you must tell us the truth. How did this happen?" What Sister Marita said next would echo through Savannah for generations. "It is a blessing from God," she said simply. "The Lord has chosen me as his vessel, just as he chose the Virgin Mary. I have been faithful to my vows. I have never broken my promise to God, and yet I carry new life within me. If you doubt me, examine my conscience. You will find it pure." The silence that followed felt suffocating. Father Hammond gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. Sister Catherine made a small sound, quickly stifled. Mother Superior Josephine stared at Sister Marie Terra, as if seeing her for the first time. "Sister," Father Hammond said carefully, "are you suggesting this is a virgin birth, that you've been impregnated by divine intervention?" "I'm suggesting nothing. I'm stating what I know to be true. I have remained faithful to my vows, and I am with child. Draw whatever conclusions you wish." Meeting ended without resolution. Father Hammond left to send an urgent message to the archbishop in Charleston. Mother Superior Josephine confined Sister Marie TZ to her cell, not as punishment, but for protection from scandal, from questions, from the chaos this revelation would unleash. But secrets in closed communities have a way of spreading like water through limestone. By the following morning, every nun in the convent knew about Sister Maritz's condition. By afternoon, the students' whispers had reached their parents. By evening, the story had infected Savannah like cholera. Enslaved people who worked at the convent heard the news through the cooking staff. They gathered in the quarters after dark, speaking in hushed tones about the scandal unfolding in the main house. Thomas, who'd been working on transcribing a new Bible for the library, said nothing. He sat in the corner of the small cabin he shared with 3 others, his hands folded, his face revealing nothing. But those who knew him well noticed something. Thomas had stopped eating. For 3 days he'd taken no food, drunk only water. His hands trembled when he worked, and late at night, when he thought others slept, they heard him weeping. The archbishop's response arrived within a week. Remarkable speed given the distance from Charleston. His letter, sealed with red wax and marked confidential, contained instructions that left no room for interpretation. Sister Marie TZ was to be examined by a panel of 3 physicians, questioned by church officials under oath, and if found to have violated her vows, immediately defrocked and expelled from the convent. The scandal must be contained before it spread beyond Savannah's boundaries. Dr. Robert Drayton arrived first, a Charleston physician with 20 years of experience, known for his discretion in sensitive matters. Dr. James Pritchard came next, Savannah's most respected medical practitioner, a man who delivered half the town's children. The third physician, Dr. Samuel Whitefield, specialized in women's health and had studied in London. Before settling in Georgia, they examined Sister Marie Terz on October 28th in the convent's medical room. All 3 reached the same conclusion. She was approximately 15 weeks pregnant. The child appeared healthy. The pregnancy showed no signs of abnormality. Their written report, preserved in Charleston Dassey's archives, used careful language but left no ambiguity. The patient exhibits all standard markers of natural conception. We find no evidence of medical anomaly or divine intervention. This is a pregnancy resulting from normal physiological processes. The interrogation began the following day. Bishop Marcus Fenwick had traveled from Charleston specifically for this purpose, bringing with him Father Thomas Donnelly, a Jesuit known for his skill in extracting truth from unwilling subjects. They questioned Sister Marie TZ for 11 hours over 3 days. She never wavered, never contradicted herself, never showed doubt or fear. Her story remained absolutely consistent. She had maintained her vows, never been alone with any man, never engaged in any act that could result in pregnancy. She attributed her condition to God's will and accepted it as a test of faith. On the 4th day, the interrogators changed tactics. Father Donnelly produced the convent's schedule logs, meticulous records Sister Marita herself had implemented, documenting every nun's location throughout each day. He began asking specific questions. Why had she changed her prayer schedule in July? Why had she been in the library at unusual hours? Why had she requested access to the storage chapel, a space normally locked on 17 separate occasions between June and September? Sister Merritt TZ answered each question calmly. The prayer schedule change reflected her growing spiritual needs. Library visits were for research on medieval monastic practices. The chapel access was to inspect storage conditions for valuable religious texts. Then Bishop Fenwick asked the question that shattered her composure. "Sister, do you know a young man named Thomas?" For the first time in 4 days of interrogation, Sister Marie TZ hesitated. The pause lasted only 3 seconds, but everyone in the room noticed it. When she spoke, her voice remained steady, but something had shifted. "Thomas works in the library. I've assigned him copying tasks. Why do you ask?" "Because Thomas has requested to speak with me," the bishop said, "and what he wants to confess, sister, concerns you." Thomas stood in the bishop's temporary office, a converted classroom at the convent school, and spoke words that would change everything. He'd been granted this audience after sending a note to Father Hammond, written in the careful script he'd learned as a child. The note contained one sentence: "I know the truth about Sister Marie TZ Child." What Thomas revealed over the next 2 hours painted a picture more complex than anyone had imagined. He confirmed that Sister Marie TZ was not lying, not exactly. She maintained her vows, never engaged in any physical act with a man, but the pregnancy was not divine intervention. It was artificial insemination. The concept wasn't unknown in 1748, though it remained largely theoretical. European scientists had experimented with animal breeding, successfully transferring reproductive material from male to female without physical contact. The process had been documented in French scientific journals, debated in medical societies, and condemned by most religious authorities as an attempt to usurp God's role in creation. Sister Marie TZ had read about these experiments in the convent's library. The texts were supposed to be locked away, controversial scientific materials deemed inappropriate for general readership. But as the head of discipline, she had access to everything. She'd studied the procedures, the theoretical applications, the success rates documented in sheep and cattle. Thomas explained that Sister Marita Rees had approached him in late May asking for his assistance with a religious experiment. She'd been frank about the purpose. She believed God was calling her to demonstrate that a woman's devotion could transcend physical limitations of age and traditional conception. She would become pregnant while maintaining her vows, proving that faith could overcome nature's boundaries. The procedure required Thomas to provide reproductive material which he would deposit into a clean glass vessel. Sister Marie Therese would then use a specially prepared syringe. She'd commissioned it from a medical supply merchant in Charleston, claiming it was for administering medicines to sick animals to transfer the material into herself. No physical contact would occur between them. Technically, her chastity would remain intact. Thomas had refused at first. The request horrified him, not just because it violated every social and religious norm, but because he understood the danger. If discovered, he would be killed. No explanation would save him. An enslaved black man involved in a nun's pregnancy. The conclusion everyone would draw, regardless of the truth, would result in his immediate execution. But Sister Marie Therese had used the one form of leverage that Thomas couldn't resist. She'd promised him freedom. She held legal authority to manumit the enslaved people owned by the convent. It required only Mother Superior's signature, which Sister Marie TZ could obtain through her position on the administrative council. She showed him documents, draft papers, her personal commitment written and signed. Help her with this experiment, and she would secure his freedom before the child was born. Procedures took place in the locked storage chapel late at night when everyone else slept. 7 attempts between June and early August. The 8th attempt on August 12th resulted in pregnancy. Thomas provided the biological component in an adjacent chamber, never seeing or touching Sister Marita Rees during the process. She handled the technical aspects herself, following procedures she'd memorized from medical texts. When Thomas finished explaining, Bishop Fenwick sat in stunned silence. Father Donnelly had stopped taking notes, his pen frozen above the page. This wasn't adultery in any conventional sense. This wasn't a broken vow of chastity, at least not in the physical interpretation. This was something far stranger, a calculated attempt to game theological loopholes to achieve pregnancy while claiming technical virginity. Why are you telling us this? Father Donnelly finally asked. Sister Marie TZ offered you freedom. This confession guarantees your death. Thomas's response revealed a pain deeper than fear because she lied to me. The freedom papers she showed me were forgeries. I saw the real documents 3 days ago when I was organizing files in Mother Superior's office. Sister Marie TZ has no authority to grant manumission. She never did. She used me, put me in mortal danger, and has no intention of honoring her promise. I won't die for her pride. The bishop ordered Thomas held in secured quarters, not arrested, but protected. Too many people already wanted him dead. Rumors had spread through Savannah about an enslaved man and Sister Marie tears. Plantation owners talked openly about taking justice into their own hands. The city's constables had to station guards around the convent to prevent mob violence. The church faced an impossible situation. Sister Marie TZ had technically not broken her vows, at least not through physical contact with Thomas, but she'd orchestrated something far more disturbing. A premeditated subversion of both divine and natural law using scientific procedures to achieve pregnancy while maintaining a legal claim to virginity, and she'd manipulated an enslaved young man, putting his life at risk for an experiment that served only her own theological vanity. What happened next would force the Catholic Church to confront questions it had never faced before. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Do you think Sister Merritts actually believed she was doing God's will? Or was this simply a calculated attempt to achieve something impossible? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is as shocking to you as it was to me, hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves dark historical mysteries. Now, let's discover what happened when the church tried to contain this scandal. The church convened an ecclesiastical tribunal on November 15, 1748. The first such proceeding in Georgia's history. 5 senior clergy traveled from Charleston, 2 from Virginia. They met in the convent's main chapel, which had been cleared of all students and sealed to outside observers. The proceedings, they determined, must remain absolutely confidential. Sister Marie TZ appeared before them dressed in full habit. Her pregnancy now undeniable, nearly 6 months along, her condition visible despite the loose clothing. She stood before the tribunal with the same serene expression she'd maintained throughout the investigation, her hands resting gently on her swollen abdomen. The lead interrogator, Cardinal Sebastian Hartley, began with a simple question. Sister, do you understand why you stand before this tribunal? I understand you doubt God's power to work miracles. The cardinal's jaw tightened. Sister, we've heard Thomas's testimony. We know about the procedures you performed, the medical equipment you acquired, the scientific texts you studied. This was not a miracle. This was a deliberate manipulation of natural processes. Is there a difference? Sister Marie TZ asked calmly. God created nature, God created science. If I use tools he provided to achieve his will, how is that different from any other miracle? Did Jesus not use mud to heal the blind man? Did Moses not use a staff to part the Red Sea? All miracles employ earthly elements to manifest divine purpose. The theological argument was sophisticated, more sophisticated than the tribunal had expected. Sister Marie Therese had clearly prepared her defense carefully, anticipating every challenge to her claim. Father Donnelly presented the evidence systematically. The medical journals in her possession, the syringe she'd commissioned, Thomas's detailed testimony about the procedures, the locked chapel where everything occurred. He argued that Sister Marie TZ had committed fraud, not adultery, but something potentially more dangerous. She'd attempted to manufacture a miracle to deceive the faithful into believing God had intervened when in fact she'd merely applied scientific knowledge. Sister Marie TZ countered each point with disturbing logic. Yes, she'd studied scientific texts. Wasn't knowledge of God's creation a form of worship? Yes, she'd used medical equipment. Weren't doctors tools of God's healing? Yes, she'd involved Thomas. Hadn't God often used the humble and powerless to achieve his greatest works? She never claimed to have created pregnancy herself. She claimed only to have made herself available to God's will, and God had blessed her efforts. You coerced an enslaved man into participating in your experiment, Cardinal Hartley said, his voice rising for the first time. You promised him freedom you couldn't deliver. You put his life at risk for your own purposes. Where is God's will in that deception? For the first time, Sister Maritz's composure cracked. Thomas misunderstood. I told him I would do everything in my power to secure his freedom. I never claimed to have the authority myself. I intended to petition Mother Superior and the archbishop after the birth to argue that his assistance in a miracle deserved reward. His freedom was always my goal. But you showed him forged documents, Father Donnelly interjected. You deliberately misled him about your authority. Sister Maritz's silence stretched for nearly a minute. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new edge. I showed him documents that expressed my intent. Whether those documents carried legal authority was irrelevant to the larger purpose. Thomas was never in danger. I would have protected him. Cardinal Hartley stood, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. Sister, there are plantation owners in Savannah calling for his execution right now. There are mobs forming outside this very building. Your protection means nothing against that reality. The tribunal recessed for 3 hours to deliberate. During that time, news reached them that justified their worst fears. A group of 23 men led by plantation owner Harrison Darrow had attempted to force their way into the convent's quarters where Thomas was being held. Only the intervention of city constables and armed guards prevented violence. DeVoe had declared publicly that no blasphemous experiment would corrupt George's moral foundation, and that the slave Thomas represented a cancer that must be cut out before it spreads. The tribunal reconvened with new urgency. Cardinal Hartley delivered their decision. Sister Marie Thiers would be immediately defrocked and expelled from religious life. She would be confined to a private residence in Charleston until the child's birth. After birth, the infant would be placed with a Catholic family, and Sister Marie Thiers, she would no longer carry that title, would be permanently exiled from Georgia. She would never be permitted to claim religious authority again, never be allowed contact with the child, and never be permitted to speak publicly about these events. Thomas would be sold not as punishment, but as protection. A Catholic merchant in Boston had agreed to purchase him and transport him immediately to Massachusetts, where anti-Catholic sentiment ran so high that nobody would think to connect him to a scandal in Savannah. The church would pay for his transport and ensure his safety, but he would remain enslaved. The promise of freedom, genuine or fabricated, died with the tribunal's ruling. Sister Marie Thiers received this judgment without visible emotion. She asked only one question: what will you tell people about the child? Cardinal Hartley's response carried the weight of institutional power protecting itself. We will tell them the truth. A woman who once served the church fell prey to pride and deception. There was no miracle. There was only human vanity attempting to manufacture divine favor. The child is evidence of sin, not blessing. But Sister Marie Thiers smiled, a small knowing expression that sent chills through everyone present. You can tell them whatever you wish, Your Eminence, but the child will be born. And when people see a healthy infant born to a woman who was 51 when conceived, who had not menstruated in years, who the doctors said should have been incapable of pregnancy, when they see that child thriving against all medical probability, what will they believe? Your carefully prepared explanation or their own eyes? The birth occurred on February 9th, 1749, in a private residence in Charleston, a two-story house the church had rented specifically for this purpose. The location was kept secret from all but essential personnel. 3 midwives attended, sworn to confidentiality. Dr. Drayton supervised, documenting everything for church records. The house itself had been chosen carefully, a modest structure on the eastern edge of Charleston, far enough from the city center to avoid casual observation, but close enough to summon additional medical help if needed. The church had paid the owner, a widow named Mrs. Elena Cunningham, 3 months' rent in advance for absolute discretion. Mrs. Cunningham asked no questions, accepted the gold coins, and spent those months visiting relatives in Virginia. Sister Marie Thiers had been transported to the residence in early January when her pregnancy became too visible to hide. 2 nuns accompanied her. Sister Agnes Fontaine, who discovered the blood-stained night dress months earlier, and Sister Catherine Mercier, whose medical training made her essential. The three women lived in near total isolation, venturing outside only for brief walks in the enclosed garden after dark. Dr. Drayton visited weekly throughout January, monitoring the pregnancy's progression with increasing amazement. Every examination confirmed what should have been impossible: a healthy, developing fetus in a 51-year-old woman whose reproductive system should have been completely dormant. He measured the growth, listened to the heartbeat through his wooden stethoscope, palpated the position. Everything proceeded normally, better than normally, in fact. He'd attended younger women whose pregnancies showed more concerning signs. "I don't understand it," he confided to his private journal on January 28th. "By every medical principle I've learned, this pregnancy should not exist. Her age, her history, the documented cessation of means 4 years prior all indicate absolute infertility. Yet the child thrives. The mother shows no signs of the complications I expected. No excessive swelling, no dangerous blood pressure fluctuations, no threatening positions. It's as if her body, despite its age, has somehow remembered how to nurture life. I find myself questioning whether medical science truly understands female reproduction as completely as we claim." The labor began at 1:15 on afternoon of February 9th. Sister Marie TZ was reading. She'd been allowed access to devotional texts, but nothing else. When the first contraction struck, Sister Catherine immediately sent word to Dr. Drayton, who arrived within the hour with his medical bag and 3 experienced midwives, Hannah Morse, Rebecca Talbot, and Sarah Wickham. All 3 had delivered hundreds of babies in Charleston. All 3 had been paid exceptional fees for their silence. The early stages progressed slowly. Sister Marie TZ paced the bedroom, leaning against furniture during contractions, breathing through pain with the same controlled discipline she'd applied to everything else in her life. She refused the lordom Dr. Drayton offered. She wanted full awareness, complete experience of this birth. If this was to be her only opportunity for motherhood, she would not surrender consciousness to pain management. By 6:00 in the evening, the contractions intensified. Sister Marie Terz could no longer walk, instead gripping the bedposts, while Sister Catherine and Sister Agnes supported her. The midwives prepared the birthing chair, a wooden seat with an opening that allowed gravity to assist delivery, but Sister Marie TZ refused it. She insisted on delivering in bed, lying semi-reclined against pillows, maintaining eye contact with everyone in the room. "I want to see everything," she said between contractions. "I want to watch this child enter the world. I've been denied so much. Don't deny me this." Dr. Drayton had serious concerns about her age and the physical demands of delivery. First-time mothers, especially older ones, faced significant risks: hemorrhaging, uterine rupture, obstructed labor, fetal distress. He'd prepared for emergency interventions, forceps if necessary. Though he hated using them, he'd seen too many injuries from improper application. In extreme cases, he'd even considered the possibility of cesarean section, though that procedure in 1749 was essentially a death sentence for the mother. At 9:30, Sister Marie Teresa's water broke, a flood that soaked through the protective linens and mattress padding. The midwives changed the bedding efficiently, working around her body as contractions came faster. Dr. Drayton examined her and found the cervix fully dilated. Time to push. What followed tested everyone's endurance. Sister Marie Ray pushed for over 4 hours, her face flushed with exertion, sweat streaming down her temples, her hands gripping Sister Catherine so hard that both women's knuckles turned white. Dr. Drayton monitored the baby's position, feeling the crown through the birth canal, coaching Sister Marie TZ through each push. The midwives took turns supporting her legs, wiping her face with cool cloths, offering sips of water. At one point, near midnight, Dr. Drayton feared the labor had stalled, dangerous for both mother and child. The baby's head had crowned but seemed stuck, unable to complete the descent. He considered using forceps but hesitated. Sister Marie TZ, seeing his expression, understood immediately. "No instruments," she gasped. "Let me try one more time." She summoned strength from somewhere deep inside, the same iron will that had sustained her through 33 years of religious discipline. Through the scandal and interrogations through months of isolation. She pushed with everything she had, and at 3:17 in the morning on February 10th, the baby emerged in a rush of blood and fluid. The infant's cry filled the room instantly, a strong, healthy sound that made everyone exhale in relief. Dr. Drayton caught the baby, quickly assessed the airway, confirmed breathing, and handed the child to Hannah Morse for cleaning. The midwife worked efficiently, wiping away blood and varix, checking fingers and toes, examining the umbilical cord. A girl, Hannah announced, perfectly formed, good color. Strong cry. Dr. Drayton delivered the placenta, examined it carefully for completeness. Retained placental tissue could cause deadly infections, and found everything normal. He checked Sister Marie TZ for tearing, found only minor damage that required a few stitches, and applied them while she lay exhausted against the pillows. Her bleeding was within normal range. Her pulse, though elevated, wasn't dangerously so. Against all probability, she'd survived childbirth without major complication. The infant weighed 6 lb 4 Oz, a healthy size. Her skin showed the typical redness of newborns, her eyes dark and unfocused, her tiny fists clenched tight. Rebecca Talbert wrapped her in clean linens and brought her to Sister Marie Terz. The church had ordered immediate separation, but Dr. Drayton intervened. "Give her 12 minutes, he told Sister Agnes, who'd been instructed to remove the baby as soon as delivery was complete. Complete denial of contact risks puerperal fever and dangerous melancholy. I've seen women die from it. 12 minutes won't change anything except possibly saving her life." Sister Agnes looked uncertain but finally nodded. She placed the infant in Sister Meritz's arms and stepped back. Sister Meritz looked down at her daughter with an expression Dr. Drayton would never forget. Not the ecstatic joy he sometimes saw in new mothers, but something more complex. Triumph mixed with grief, wonder mixed with desperation. She touched the baby's face with trembling fingers, traced the tiny nose, the perfect ears, the downy hair. "They will tell you I deceived people," she whispered, her voice from hours of labor. "They will say I manufactured you through pride and manipulation. But I know the truth. I was barren, medically absolutely barren. 3 physicians confirmed it. Dr. Drayton himself said, my body could not support pregnancy, yet you exist, you breathe, you are perfect." The baby made small sounds, rooting instinctively toward Sister Meritz's chest. Dr. Drayton had forbidden nursing. The church wanted no bond formed that would make separation more difficult, but he allowed this moment of contact. Sister Marie TZ held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of new life, memorizing every detail. "Whether I used science or faith or both," she continued, "something beyond human understanding happened. They say it wasn't a miracle because I employed mechanical means. But who decides what miracles look like? If God gave humans the intelligence to understand his creation, is using that intelligence somehow less divine than passive? Waiting, you are my testimony. You are my answer to everyone who says faith and knowledge cannot coexist." At 3:29, 12 minutes after birth, Sister Agnes stepped forward. "It's time." Sister Meritz kissed her daughter's forehead once gently and released her. Sister Agnes took the infant and left the room immediately before Sister Marie TZ could change her mind. The door closed with a soft click that sounded in the sudden silence impossibly final. Sister Marie Terz turned her face to the wall and didn't speak for 3 days. The adoptive family, Jonathan and Susanna Redmond of Virginia, arrived in Charleston on February 11th. They were a prosperous couple in their 30s, unable to have children after 10 years of marriage. The church had vetted them carefully. Devout Catholics, financially secure, socially respected, desperate for a child, and willing to maintain absolute secrecy about the infant's origins. Bishop Fenwick met them personally in a private room at Charleston's Catholic rectory. He handed them the baby, now dressed in expensive linens the church had provided, and explained the conditions. They would tell everyone, family, friends, their entire community, that the child was their natural daughter, born to Susanna after years of supposed infertility. They would never reveal the truth, never search for the biological mother, never discuss how they'd acquired the baby. They would raise her as a proper Catholic, educate her appropriately for her station, and provide her every advantage. In exchange, the church would support their story completely, Father Thomas Donnelly had already prepared falsified baptismal records showing the baby as born to the Redmonds. The church would provide witnesses if needed, nuns who would swear they'd attended Savannah during her pregnancy, priests who would confirm they'd blessed the expectant mother months earlier. Jonathan Redmond held the infant awkwardly. He'd never touched a baby before. While Susanna wept with joy, they asked only one question. "What's her name?" "She has no name." Bishop Fenwick said, "You will choose it and baptize her in your parish church." As far as the world is concerned, she came into existence on February 10th, 1749 in Virginia. Everything before that moment is erased. They named her Charlotte, baptized her on February 20th at their parish church in Richmond, and raised her as their own. She would never know different. Sister Marie Tizzy remained in the Charleston residence for 2 months, physically recovering while church officials debated her fate. The recovery itself surprised Dr. Drayton. He'd expected complications, infections, hemorrhaging, the dangerous puerperal fevers that killed so many new mothers. Instead, Sister Marie Tizzy healed quickly. Her stitches dissolved normally. Her bleeding stopped within 10 days. By late February, she was physically healthy. Mentally, however, she descended into a state doctor. Drayton found deeply concerning. She ate only when Sister Catherine forced food into her hands. She stared at walls for hours without speaking. She refused to pray, wouldn't even hold a rosary when offered. At night, the other women heard her weeping, long sessions of silent tears that seemed to drain away her remaining strength. Sister Catherine, who'd known Sister Marie Tizzy for 7 years, recognized this wasn't simple grief. This was complete psychological collapse, the breaking of a will that had seemed unbreakable. She invested everything in this. Sister Catherine told Dr. Drayton during one of his visits. Her entire identity, her understanding of her relationship with God, her belief that she could demonstrate faith through knowledge. Now the child is gone. Her religious life is over and she has nothing left. I fear she may harm herself. Dr. Drayton increased his visits to daily monitoring not just physical recovery but mental state. He brought her books, not religious texts but literature, histories, anything to engage her mind. She barely looked at them. He tried conversation, asking about her childhood in Quebec, her early years in religious life, anything to draw her back toward engagement with the world. She answered in monosyllables or not at all. During these weeks, Sister Marie Tizzy wrote extensively, letters, theological arguments, personal reflections. Writing seemed to be the only activity that stirred her from lethargy. She filled page after page with neat script, working by candlelight late into the night. Sister Catherine collected these pages each morning, unsure what to do with them. Church officials had ordered that Sister Merritt's produce no written materials, but Sister Catherine couldn't bring herself to confiscate the only thing that seemed to keep the woman from complete despair. Most of these documents were eventually destroyed when church officials discovered their existence. Only 3 letters survived, preserved by Father Michael O'Brien, a young priest who'd been assigned to assist with Sister Marie Terz's exile preparations. Something in the letters moved him, their raw honesty, their refusal to recant despite everything, their complex grappling with questions of faith and knowledge. He hid them in his personal papers, a small act of rebellion against institutional orders. The first letter, dated March 5th, was addressed to no one, or perhaps to God, or perhaps to the daughter she'd never see again. They tell me I sinned through pride. Perhaps they're right. But what is faith without action? What is belief without testing? Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac to prove his devotion. Was my experiment so different? I offered myself, my body, my reputation, my entire religious life to demonstrate that God's creation includes pathways we haven't yet understood. I studied how life begins. I applied that knowledge. A child was born who doctors said couldn't exist. They call this deception, but I call it partnership with divine purpose. God created natural law, using that law to achieve what seems impossible. Isn't that faith made manifest? The second letter, dated March 15th, addressed her treatment of Thomas directly. I have sinned grievously against Thomas, and this sin weighs heavier than any other charge against me. I told myself his participation served a higher purpose, that the end justified the means, that I would ultimately secure his freedom and make everything right, but I lied to him. I showed him forged documents. I manipulated his desperate hope for liberty to serve my goals. I told myself I would protect him, but I couldn't. I didn't. The church sold him away to save itself from scandal, and I lacked the power or position to intervene. If there is damnation, I deserve it not for the pregnancy. I still believe that was righteous, but for how I treated another human being as a tool rather than a soul equal in God's eyes. Thomas, if you somehow read these words, know that I am sorry. It changes nothing, repairs no harm, but it is true. Third letter, dated March 29th, contained her theological defense, the argument she'd been refining since the tribunal. The church fathers who condemned me claim that manipulating natural processes cannot constitute divine intervention. But I ask, what is prayer but an attempt to influence divine will? What are sacraments but physical materials, bread, wine, water, oil used to convey spiritual grace? What is any religious practice but human action intended to connect with transcendent reality? I used knowledge instead of ritual, science instead of ceremony, but the goal remained identical: to demonstrate God's power working through human agency. They reject my method while embracing their own, but both rely on the same principle, that divine and human action can intersect. They call their intersections holy and mine heretical simply because I employed tools they don't yet understand or approve. In 100 years, perhaps 200, medical science will make pregnancy possible for women deemed barren. When that day comes, will they remember me as heretic or pioneer? Will they see that I was simply ahead of the methods, not wrong in the principle? These letters reveal a woman grappling with genuine theological questions, not simply rationalizing selfish actions. She understood the complexity of what she'd done, the scientific audacity, the religious implications, the moral failures. She refused to repent entirely because she genuinely believed the pregnancy itself was justified, even if her treatment of Thomas was not. This nuanced position infuriated church authorities who wanted either complete repentance or complete defiance. Sister Marie Tz offered neither, just complicated truth. The church's final decision came in April. Bishop Fenwick arrived personally to deliver the sentence. Sister Marie Tz would be exiled to the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Quebec, a cloistered community that maintained perpetual silence where nuns spent their lives in contemplative prayer, isolated from the world. She would take new vows there different from her original commitments, vows of absolute silence, absolute obedience, absolute withdrawal from worldly engagement. She would never teach, never write, never speak about her experiences in Savannah. She would be listed in official records as having died in Charleston in 1749. For all practical purposes, Marie Terzlair would cease to exist. You are being granted mercy. Bishop Fenwick told her the alternative is complete excommunication, removal from the church entirely, leaving you with no community and no purpose. At least in Quebec, you remain within the faith, even if silenced. Sister Marie Tz received this sentence without visible emotion. She'd expected worse: public excommunication, perhaps even trial in secular court for fraud or deception. Exiled to a silent monastery meant continued survival, if not the life she'd envisioned. "May I ask one question?" she said finally. Bishop Fenwick nodded. "The child, Charlotte, they named her. Will she be told anything of her origins when she's older?" "Absolutely nothing. She'll know only that Jonathan and Susanna Redmond are her parents. This conversation, this question is the last time her true origin will be spoken aloud within the church. Do you understand?" Sister Marie understood. She nodded once and spoke no more. On April 23, 1749, accompanied by Father O'Brien and Sister Catherine, who'd volunteered to escort her to Quebec, Sister Marie Tz departed Charleston aboard the merchant ship Harmony. The voyage to Boston took 6 days. The overland journey to Quebec another 3 weeks. Sister Catherine's letters to her family, preserved in the Savannah Dassey's archives, describe Sister Marie Tz during this journey as a woman already departed from this world, physically present but spiritually elsewhere. They reached the convent of the Sacred Heart on May 27th. Sister Catherine stayed only 3 days before beginning her return journey to Georgia. She wrote one final letter to Mother Superior Josephine Beaumont describing Sister Marie Tz's arrival. She entered the chapel for Vespers and took her place among the silent sisters without hesitation. When the service ended and the others departed without speaking, she simply closed her eyes and began to pray. "I don't know if she'll find peace in this place, but I know she'll keep its silence. She has nothing left to say." The convent of the Sacred Heart burned in 1700. 163 during the 7 Years' War when British forces occupied Quebec. No records survived indicating whether Sister Marie Thiers died in the fire, had died earlier from illness, or somehow survived and lived elsewhere. Official church records list her as deceased in 1749, making her actual fate unknowable. Thomas's journey proved far more perilous than anyone anticipated. He'd arrived in Boston on December 4th, 1748, sold to merchant Isaac Petton for 42 sterling, significantly above market value, with the church paying the difference to ensure Petton's cooperation in keeping Thomas's origins secret. Petton operated a shipping and textile business that required educated workers capable of managing accounts, correspondence, and inventory. Thomas fit these requirements perfectly. Petton installed him in a small office above the warehouse, gave him ledgers to maintain, and initially seemed satisfied with the arrangement. But Boston's religious climate proved more hostile than the church had anticipated. The city's Puritan majority viewed Catholic institutions with deep suspicion, and the Savannah scandal, though details remain suppressed, had leaked enough information to spark intense interest. Newspapers published speculative articles, ministers delivered sermons about Catholic corruption. The mere hint of conspiracy involving nuns, enslaved people, and supposed miracles inflamed existing prejudices. Reverend Jonathan Cole of the Old North Church became particularly obsessed with the case. He'd heard rumors that someone connected to the scandal had been relocated to Boston, and he was determined to expose what he called papist deception threatening New England's moral purity. Throughout December 1748 and January 1749, he preached sermons on the topic, never naming Thomas directly, but describing a plot involving religious figures, enslaved people, and attempts to manufacture false miracles that would deceive honest Christians. Thomas kept his head down, worked diligently, and hoped the attention would fade. He lived in the warehouse's upper floor, rarely venturing into the city, avoiding any situation that might draw notice. He'd learned in Savannah that visibility meant danger. Petton had instructed him to tell anyone who asked that he'd worked for the merchant for years, that he'd been purchased from a Virginia estate, that his education came from a kindly previous owner. The story was thin but believable enough if nobody investigated closely. The situation remained manageable until March 7, 1749, when disaster struck. A sailor who'd worked on the ship that transported Thomas from Charleston happened to dock in Boston, and after several drinks in a waterfront tavern, mentioned to his companions that he'd carried the black fellow from that Catholic nun scandal down in Georgia. And the sailor didn't know Thomas's name and couldn't point to his location. But the mere confirmation that someone connected to the scandal was in Boston sparked immediate uproar. Reverend Cole heard the rumor within hours. Boston's religious community communicated with remarkable efficiency when Catholic scandal was involved. He immediately began investigating, questioning merchants who'd recently acquired enslaved workers, checking dock records, interviewing ship captains. His persistence paid off. By March 9th, he'd identified Petton's recent purchase of an unusually educated enslaved man from Charleston. Cole appeared at Petton's warehouse on March 10th, accompanied by 6 members of his congregation. They demanded to see Thomas, insisting they had questions about Catholic corruption and deception. Petton, caught between business interests and community pressure, made a calculated decision. He couldn't hide Thomas. Cole would simply return with more people, possibly with constables, but he also couldn't hand Thomas over to what was clearly becoming a mob. "Thomas works for me," Petton told Cole firmly. "He's my legal property, purchased legitimately. If you have questions about Catholic Church activities, direct them to the church. Thomas is simply a worker who had the misfortune of being owned by a Catholic institution. He's guilty of nothing except being in the wrong place." Cole wasn't satisfied. He participated in sacrilege. He helped manufacture a false miracle. He defiled a bride of Christ. The details don't matter. His very existence here, his freedom to walk and work among honest Christians, is an affront to God. The confrontation grew heated. Cole's followers demanded Thomas be turned over for proper questioning. Pemberton refused, threatening to summon constables if they didn't leave his property. The standoff lasted 3 hours before Cole finally departed, but not before making his intentions clear. "This isn't over. That man will answer for his sins, whether you protect him or not." Pean understood the danger immediately. Boston's constables might theoretically protect property rights, but they wouldn't risk public disorder to protect an enslaved man connected to Catholic scandal. If Cole returned with a larger mob, Petton would have no choice but to surrender Thomas or risk his business being destroyed. That night, Petton made arrangements. He owned merchant vessels that traded throughout the Atlantic. One ship, the Providence, was scheduled to depart March 11th for Nova Scotia, carrying textiles and tools to Halifax. Petton had business contacts there, including a merchant named William Barrett, who occasionally needed workers for his warehouse operations. "I'm sending you to Halifax," Petton told Thomas the next morning. "It's not freedom. I'm signing you over to Barrett, who will manage you there, but it gets you out of Boston before this situation explodes. Barrett's a decent man. He'll treat you fairly, and Halifax is far enough from these religious wars that nobody will care about your past." Thomas had no choice but to agree. That afternoon, he boarded the Providence with nothing but the clothes he wore, and a small satchel containing writing materials Petton had given him. The ship departed at dusk, slipping out of Boston Harbor, while Reverend Cole was organizing a larger group to return to Pemberton's warehouse the following day. The voyage to Halifax took 12 days, March 11th through March 23rd. The ship's log, preserved in the Massachusetts Maritime Museum, lists Thomas as indentured crew, Carpenter's assistant, a legal fiction that provided some protection from immediate recapture if the ship encountered authorities. In reality, Thomas worked primarily in the cargo hold, organizing goods, managing inventory, and assisting with loading and unloading at ports. The Providence reached Halifax on March 23, 1749. Halifax itself was barely a town. Founded only months earlier as a British colonial outpost to counter French presence in Nova Scotia, with a population of around 2,500 people, mostly military personnel, merchants, and a small number of enslaved or indentured workers. The settlement consisted of rough buildings, muddy streets, and a constant sense of precarious establishment. William Barrett met the ship personally. He was a Scottish merchant in his 40s who'd established a small trading operation supplying the military garrison. His warehouse needed someone literate to manage records, correspondence, and inventory, work he'd been doing himself but preferred to delegate. Petton's letter had described Thomas' education and skills, making him valuable despite the suspicious circumstances of his transfer. Barrett examined Thomas with practical assessment. "You can read and write." "Yes, sir." "Keep accounts." "Yes, sir." "Petton says you're involved in some church scandal down south." "I don't care about that. I care whether you'll work honestly and competently." "Will you?" "Yes, sir." "Good. You'll live in the warehouse, manage my records, and help with physical operations when needed. I pay workers in goods, food, clothing, supplies. If you prove valuable, I may consider eventual manumission, but that's years away and dependent on circumstances." Understood. Thomas understood. This was far better than he'd expected. Work that utilized his education, an owner who seemed pragmatic rather than cruel, and distanced from the religious persecution that had threatened his life in Boston. He settled into Halifax's rhythms quickly. The work was manageable, the conditions tolerable. Barrett treated him fairly, never raising hand or voice, paying in promised goods. Thomas managed warehouse records, corresponded with suppliers, organized inventory for military contracts. He was good at the work, efficient and accurate, but Halifax proved brutally difficult in other ways. The winter of 1749-1750 brought extraordinary cold, temperatures that froze the harbor solid, winds that cut through the warehouse's thin walls, snow that buried the settlement for weeks. Food supplies ran short. Scurvy broke out among the garrison. Several people froze to death in their homes. Thomas survived the winter barely. Barrett provided adequate food and firewood. but the cold tested everyone's endurance. By spring 1750, Thomas had lost significant weight, suffered from persistent cough, and showed signs of the vitamin deficiencies plaguing Halifax's population. The historical record of Thomas ends here. Barrett's business records, fragmentary and incomplete, show Thomas working through September 1750. After that date, no documentation mentions him. Halifax's early records are notoriously incomplete. Fires destroyed many documents. Administrative chaos characterized the settlement's first years, and record-keeping for enslaved and indentured people was often haphazard. Several theories exist about Thomas's fate. Some historians believe he gained actual freedom in Nova Scotia. British colonial authorities there took a more lenient view toward escaped enslaved people, particularly those with useful skills. Thomas might have negotiated manumission with Barrett, or simply disappeared into the colony's frontier regions, where questions about legal status went unasked. Others think he likely died during the winter of 1750-1751, even harsher than the previous year, when Halifax experienced catastrophic cold and food shortages that killed dozens, weakened by malnutrition and respiratory illness. Thomas might not have survived. A third possibility, supported by fragmentary evidence, suggests Thomas may have joined a group of free black settlers who established a small community near Preston, Nova Scotia, in the early 1750s. A land grant record from 1752 lists a Thomas among the settlers, but provides no surname or additional identifying information. The truth remains unknowable. Thomas vanished from history, one more powerless person destroyed by forces beyond his control. His voice preserved only in those few hours of testimony before the Charleston tribunal. Charlotte, the infant at the scandal center, lived a completely different life, untouched by knowledge of her origins. The Redmonds raised her as their natural daughter in Richmond, Virginia, providing education, comfort, and social position appropriate to their status. Charlotte grew into an intelligent, serious-minded young woman. She received education from a private tutor, unusual, but not unheard of for daughters of prosperous families. She learned French, studied literature, became accomplished at piano and needlework. Family correspondence preserved in the Virginia Historical Society describes her as thoughtful beyond her years, sometimes melancholy, but beautiful and kind. She married at 19 to Edward Fitzgerald, a merchant's son from Philadelphia. The marriage was companionable, if not passionate. They lived together respectfully, managed household affairs efficiently, and raised 4 children who survived to adulthood. Charlotte's letters to her mother, written throughout her marriage, reveal a woman content with her life, but occasionally troubled by vague feelings of disconnection she couldn't explain. In one letter dated June 1771, Charlotte wrote, "Sometimes I feel as though I'm living someone else's life, Mother. Not unhappily. Edward is good to me. The children are healthy. We want for nothing. But sometimes I look in the mirror and wonder whose face I'm seeing. You'll think me foolish for such thoughts. Pay no attention." Susanna Redmond's response, also preserved, shows a mother's careful deflection. "All women feel such things occasionally, dearest. We wonder who we might have been, what other paths might have unfolded. These thoughts mean nothing. You are exactly who you should be. My beloved daughter, Edward's devoted wife, mother to my precious grandchildren. Nothing else matters." Charlotte lived to age 73, dying in Philadelphia in 1822, surrounded by family. Her obituary in the Philadelphia Gazette described her as a woman of exemplary character, devoted mother, and generous supporter of charitable works. She'd lived an entire life, raised children who raised children, impacted her community in small but meaningful ways. She never knew the circumstances of her conception, the scandal that surrounded her birth, or the remarkable woman who brought her into the world through such extraordinary means. Whether Charlotte ever suspected her origins were more complex than she'd been told remains unknown. Family stories suggest she occasionally questioned why she bore no physical resemblance to either parent. She was taller than both Redmonds, darker-haired with facial features that matched neither family line. But these questions, if she asked them, received no answers that disturbed her understanding of herself. St. Catherine's Convent never recovered from the scandal. Enrollment dropped catastrophically. Prosperous families who'd sent daughters there withdrew them immediately, unwilling to associate with an institution tainted by such controversy. By 1755, the facility housed only 8 nuns, 12 students, and had lost most of its financial support. The Catholic Church closed it permanently in 1758, selling the property to merchant Samuel Dawkins, who converted the buildings into warehouses. During the conversion, workers sealed the storage chapel where Sister Marie Thérèse had performed her procedures. Official documents cite structural concerns about the chapel's foundation, but church correspondence suggests the real motivation, eliminating any physical space associated with the scandal. Whatever materials or evidence might have remained inside, equipment, documents, any trace of what occurred there was buried behind brick walls that remain intact today. The sealed chapel remained untouched, its secrets buried behind stone and mortar. The convent's closure in 1758 marked the end of St. Catherine's presence in Savannah, but not the end of whispered stories about what had occurred within those walls. In the years immediately following the scandal, Savannah's Catholic community fractured. Many families who'd supported the convent withdrew their patronage from the church entirely, unwilling to associate with an institution that had harbored such controversy. Protestant ministers used the scandal as evidence of Catholic moral corruption, pointing to it in sermons for years afterward. The few remaining Catholic families in Georgia found themselves defending their faith against constant suspicion. Mother Superior Josephine Beaumont, who'd requested Sister Marie Thérèse's transfer to Savannah 7 years earlier, lived with profound guilt. She'd brought Sister Marie Thérèse specifically to reform the convent's discipline, never imagining the woman would orchestrate something so elaborate. In letters to her sister in New Orleans, preserved until her death in 1756, Josephine wrote, "I thought I was bringing God's strictest servant to guide us toward righteousness. Instead, I brought a woman whose devotion had twisted into something I cannot name. Was it pride, madness, true faith? Gone astray, I will die not knowing, and perhaps that uncertainty is my penance. The other nuns who'd lived through the scandal carried their own burdens. Sister Agnes Fontaine, who discovered the blood-stained night dress, left religious life entirely in 1752, returning to her family in Charleston. Sister Catherine Mirier, who'd attended the birth and later accompanied Sister Marie Thérèse to Quebec, continued serving in various convents until her death in 1772, but her letters suggest she never fully reconciled what she'd witnessed. I saw a healthy child born to a woman who should not have been capable of bearing life. She wrote to a fellow nun in 1760, I held that infant in my hands. Whatever sister merits his sins, whatever her methods, that child was real and perfect. How do we understand such things? Thomas's owner in Halifax, William Barrett, mentioned him only once more in surviving correspondence. In a letter to a business associate dated November 1750, Barrett wrote, "The worker Petton sent me proved capable for a time, but has since departed my service. I know not where he went, nor do I inquire too closely. Some men carry shadows that follow them everywhere, and I've learned not to stand too near such shadows, lest they fall on me as well." Charlotte Fitzgerald, born Charlotte Redmond, lived her entire life in Virginia and Pennsylvania, bearing and raising 4 children who knew nothing of their grandmother's history. Her husband Edward's business prospered modestly, providing comfortable, if not wealthy, circumstances. When Charlotte died in 1008, her daughter, Eleanor, sorted through her mother's possessions and found a small wooden box containing items Charlotte had treasured. Her mother's wedding ring, pressed flowers from her wedding day, letters from her father, and curiously, a single page torn from a Bible, the page containing Luke's account of the Annunciation, when the angel Gabriel tells Mary she will bear a child. Elinda noticed her mother had underlined certain phrases, "How shall this be, seeing I know not a man, and for with God nothing shall be impossible." Why these particular verses held meaning for Charlotte, Elinda never learned. She kept the page with her mother's other effects, and it passed through generations of the Fitzgerald family, its significance forgotten. In Savannah, the warehouse that had once been St. Catherine's Convent stood as a reminder of scandal slowly fading into local legend. By 1780, most people who'd lived through the original events had died,